Been made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Consi, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
A truck driver constantly has to drive his truck down a lonely country road that has this courthouse right on the side out in the middle of the country. And this truck driver hates lawyers so much that if he ever sees a lawyer trying to cross the road, he actually runs the lawyer over with his truck and enjoys the sound of the thud he hears each time. Well, one day this truck driver was driving along this country road. He was about a mile from the courthouse, and he sees a priest on the side of the road hitchhiking. And he pulls over and he takes the priest in, and the priest says, "Thank you, my son. My car broke down. Can you take me to the church that's 5 miles down the road?" The truck driver says, "Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to, Father." And as he's got the priest in the truck, they're driving, and he sees a lawyer crossing the road. And he's going to hit him, and then he realizes, "Oh no, I've got a priest in my truck. I better swerve." And he swerves and just barely misses the lawyer, but he still hears a thud. And he turns to the priest, thinking he had hit the lawyer, and he says, "Oh my God, Father, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me." And the priest says, "Don't worry, I got him with the door." I'm Neil Consi. Welcome to Attorney Confidential.
And I'm Gus Bravo. I think you may have repeated that joke.
No, that's the first time I've told that.
Are you sure?
You may have heard it, but I haven't told it on the show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so,
you've heard it.
Oh, it was very funny.
Right.
Even last time I heard it, so
right.
A lot of the jokes obviously are repeating them, but very apropos because today, religious.
Right, we're talking about religion. That's I told you.
Today is Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. All my Jewish friends out there, happy Rosh Hashanah, happy New Year. It's the Jewish New Year.
It is the Jewish New Year. Now, is it because it's just the old calendar that you go by?
Right. The Hebrews use a lunar calendar. So it's never, the holidays never, that's why sometimes Hanukkah will fall during Christmas, sometimes it'll fall during Thanksgiving, and rarely it'll fall in January.
So it's never a fixed date, it's just based
right, it is to them, but not to us.
Interesting. So now what, today you're not supposed to work at all?
Yep, not supposed to work. We're in temple it depends on whether you're Reform or Orthodox, whether it's from 9 to 10:30 or 9 to 2:30.
What's interesting about that is because the schools were closed.
Right.
But the courthouse was not.
Exactly. And with all the Jewish lawyers, you would figure.
I'm glad you made that joke.
Well, the other thing we joked about is for those of you that take a 6-month extension on your taxes, tomorrow is the filing date. And I know Gus is having trouble getting it filed because his Jewish accountant. But you got it. He filed it on Sunday. He
filed it on Sunday.
Yeah.
So, and he was pressing me because I guess tomorrow also is.
Right. It's a 2-day holiday.
Okay. So you would think they would coordinate that a little bit better with the federal government, but, I digress because I think we'll get. But I don't want to get off the religion topic because obviously that has been a hot button item or hot button item as of late. We're talking about obviously the gay marriage, the Kentucky law clerk, Kim Davis, who just. It's still in the news. I mean, I think today she finally went back to work. So to bring up, those listeners who have not been following this, there's a law clerk in the state of Kentucky who had refused on religious grounds to issue a marriage license. And she was claiming that it violated her religious beliefs. And so eventually she was ultimately jailed because she was in violation of a U.S. Supreme Court opinion, which we talked about.
Contempt of court.
Right. And so they gave her the option of, look, we're going to, you don't have to do them. But I guess the compromise now was that she doesn't have to not only not do them, but the licenses themselves are not going to bear her name. So they're going to be issued by other, I guess,
underlings
or sub-clerks or whatever have you. But it raises interesting questions about how far can you go in raising hey, it's against my religious beliefs. And I think we'll have a picture of of Miss Kim Davis when she exited the jail last week, or I want to say on Friday or Thursday or Friday, and she was accompanied by some fellow Republicans, which is ironic because I think you have some background on her political connections.
I mean, what's so interesting about Kim Davis is that she's an elected official, which is why a lot of people say, why don't you just fire her? And what people don't realize is she's actually an elected official as the clerk of that court system, and it's an elected position. Therefore, she can't be fired. She could only be impeached. And the Kentucky Congress would actually have to go through a whole set of hearings and to impeach her to have her lose her job. But that's a long about way of saying as an elected official, she actually is a Democrat, which you don't see that anywhere in the news that she is an elected Democrat and a member of the Democratic Party.
Well, the Republicans surely have adopted her as one of their own.
Exactly. It's sad, really. I mean, the whole thing is sad.
Well, her mother was a clerk for years,
right?
And so she took over that position. I guess it runs in the family. But look, I think to us, the interesting angle obviously is the use of religious beliefs, the use of that argument to say, I am not going to uphold this law. I'm not going to apply this law because it is against my religious beliefs. And we can see the slippery slope that could create.
Absolutely. And we know all 12 listeners out there. We used to say 2. I think we're up to 12 now. But all listeners
except
out there.
Except the Jewish guys who are actually not listening at all.
The evening service. There's an evening service tonight, but it doesn't start till 7:30. But at 1-888-565-1470 if you want to talk, because I'm sure this is a topic that many people feel strongly about. It's one of those topics that you either have a strong opinion or you really just don't care about it, but there's not a lot of middle ground there.
You won't find a strong indifference.
No, I think that's fair. So I don't know if you have the picture of Kim to show.
Well, I did the plug to get the picture up, but apparently, it's sort of...
Because I had a good joke when you showed the picture. But anyway, that friend of mine, I live in Miami Shores, and in Miami Shores has a very high gay and lesbian population. And one of my friends in the Shores looked at a picture of her, and if you ever look at one, you says, "Gee, I wonder why she has so much trouble finding a good hairdresser." You look at her hair.
Especially now.
Right, exactly. She'll never find one now. But no, I mean, it does raise an interesting issue, because where do you draw the line with respect to asserting your religious views or protecting religious views? And as lawyers, we like to talk about the slippery slope of where is that line. I mean, we can come up with these hypothetical examples.
There
she is. Yeah.
So that's one Mr. Huckabee, Mike Huckabee next to her. And she's smiling, and then you see the picture. What I liked about it, because you have the cross there in the foreground, and the background she's clutching the microphone. But go ahead, this is your.
And what were they? What was it they were playing? "Eye of the Tiger," I think, and "Survivor." Was it the song that the band called up and is complaining that their song was used for this purpose?
Not know that.
Pretty sure it was "Eye of the Tiger." I can't remember. I think that's right. I think it was "Eye of the Tiger" by Survivor. And so the band, whoever the lead singer is, called Huckabee and raised a formal complaint. But it's public. You can use that for any purpose. You can play that music in public forums.
As long as you don't charge for it. That's a whole different thing. If you charge an admissions fee for it, then you do have to pay the royalties.
Exactly.
But go ahead. I think the comment you were going to make was about... Oh, you already made the joke about her hair and all that stuff.
Right.
What's interesting about it is she's been divorced 4 times.
Yeah, I mean, really, call a spade a spade. I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, the whole thing is a joke. I think sometimes in politics we get caught up too much in these what I'll call side issues, and I don't mean that the right of gays and lesbians to marry is a side issue. I think that is not a side issue. But we have one clerk in one small town in one of our smaller states, and now she has become the national story. I'm sure that we have plenty of other stories of more import, but I think both sides are milking it for all it's worth. I think the sides that are anti-gay marriage are trying to milk this for all it's worth. I think the pros...
I think what it does raise, though, it's, sometimes these battles are waged in faraway, distant places, right? And so what it raises are interesting, again, issues about how the interplay, if you will, between religious freedom or the right to be, free from religious persecution, versus the law that obligates people and advances freedom. So this is a perfect crossroad, if you will, because.
Did you use the term crossroad intentionally, or just?
No, I did not. but the sophomore humor, I guess, picked up on that.
All right.
But I think it's I was actually listening to a conservative talk show the other day, even though clearly, if you've been listening to this show, that's not my ilk. But sometimes you have to listen to the other side, right? And so they were talking about, and this is true, be careful of what you wish for. Be careful of opening up this potential Pandora's box, conservatives, about allowing religion to play a role in how we apply the laws and how we uphold the laws, because you may have, for instance, another religious group, Muslims or whatever have you, that have certain views that some people may not necessarily agree with, particularly about women and the role that women could play not only home but in the workplace, and some of the liberties that we tend to take for granted here that may not necessarily be available to them, in part because of religious views. And so suddenly you have that but this is a slippery slope. So I think it's an interesting issue, something to keep an eye on, because you can't push the envelope too much. This if what's, to borrow the oft-quoted phrase, what's good for the geese is good for the gander, right?
Exactly.
If you're going to allow it here, then we're going to allow it over there.
And where do you draw this line? I mean, I think that the compromise reached in this case is probably the right compromise. If, with respect to religious discrimination or accommodating someone's religious beliefs, the question becomes the state's interest in pursuing its policy or pursuing its law versus the person's individual religious interest. And what you try to do is you try to accommodate the religious interest, if possible, without it being an undue burden on the state. So here you're wrestling with, is there a way to accommodate her religious beliefs, put her in compliance with the law, without an undue burden on the state? And the compromise was, okay, you don't have to sign these, but you have to allow your underlings or your associate clerks or whatever they're called.
Don't get in the way.
And you can't get in the way. And what she was initially doing, if you recall, because when this first started, her and all of her employees were brought into court because they were all refusing to sign under her instruction. And the other ones caved pretty quickly when they realized they were going to be spending the night in the Gray Bar Motel. So
the Gray Bar Motel.
So she had to go. She ended up going there. The judge told her, "I hope you have a toothbrush with you," and the rest of them got to go home because they agreed in her absence to sign the marriage licenses for gay and lesbian weddings.
It's amazing what a night at the Gray Bar Motel will do to people's religious convictions.
Right. Sometimes people find religion. Right? How many people go to jail that have no religious background and they come out of jail and they're born-again Christians? They found God in jail. God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. Apparently he's frequently in the jails because more prisoners find God.
And I think that brings us to the halfway point of our show. I think it's a great place to break. But so far we've been talking about religion, the law, and obviously the Kentucky law clerk, or not the Kentucky clerk,
right?
And the issues that could raise. So you're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. 888-565-1470. We'll be happy to take your calls.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsey and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell and Superb by AVVO, the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Codsey is the litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Codsey is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a two-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711, and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, Call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Neil for more Attorney Confidential.
And we're back with Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. Again, I'm going to lodge a complaint about the length of your commercial promo versus compared to mine.
You can rewrite it.
I think less is more. I don't have to stick out my chest and talk about how great and all the awards I've won and the second grade class participation and perfect attendance in fifth grade.
Oh, I never had perfect attendance.
I'm going to bring those out. So we've been talking about the gay marriage issue from the perspective of the Kentucky clerk who refused to uphold the law. And now a compromise has been reached where I think earlier we mentioned how it's a reasonable compromise where the courts have said, look, you don't have to have the license issued in your name. Just don't get in the way of other folks issuing it. And obviously this is an elected official and there's a whole issue about having to impeach her, which clearly when it involves a conservative, that's really difficult to do. When it involves a Democrat, why not? Let's have at it, right? But I digress. But
Wow.
the one interesting thing that you mentioned earlier, because people were asking, why not fire her? Well, let me ask you a hypothetical. What if this was, instead of making an elected official, this is just a private employer in the workplace? Why not fire them? And what are some of the things that an employer has to do or doesn't have to do to accommodate someone's religious views?
It's funny. In some ways, accommodating someone's religion is very similar in the law to accommodating someone's disability. I'm not going to equate the two per se, but really the legal analysis.
Not today, anyways.
Not today. The legal analysis is very similar. It's a reasonable accommodation. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an Orthodox Jew who doesn't work on Saturdays, and they're applying for a position at a Home Depot or think of any retail establishment that's open 7 days a week. Unless you actually need them to be there on Saturday, it's probably a reasonable accommodation to hire them and they can work 6 days a week instead of 7. And if you have other employees that work 6 days a week, if you have some employees that have Wednesdays off and other employees that have Sundays off, you can't not hire that person just because they can't work on Saturday, because you've accommodated other employees with a similar accommodation. That would arguably be discrimination. But let's say you have a big company and you need a weekend manager. And your weekend manager literally works 12 hours a day, 36 hours, but it's 12 hours on Friday, 12 hours on Saturday, and 12 hours on Sunday. And that's the job you're looking to hire. Then, if this Orthodox Jew is applying for that position, it wouldn't be a reasonable accommodation because you're actually looking for someone who can work 36 hours over the weekend, and this person would have to stop work before sunset Friday and not work at all on Saturday. So now they're unable to work almost half of what you're hiring them for. So
you wouldn't have to. You would not have to make that accommodation.
Correct. So it
would be an unreasonable accommodation.
Right. So you're not necessarily. You are in some ways not hiring them because of their religion, because you're saying I can't hire you because you can't work Saturdays, and their response is, but that's my religion, and your response is, but I can't accommodate that based on this job. So it's a back and forth. So arguably you are refusing to hire them because of their religion. So that's what you have to look at. And so if this were an employment situation with Kim Davis,
right,
the employer would have to say, well, can I accommodate that religious belief by having other people do that particular aspect of your job? In other words, she can do 90, I mean, what percentage of her job is signing marriage licenses for gay marriage, right? It can't be in Kentucky. It can't be that high of a percentage, right? I mean, let's be realistic here. So
does that include cousins or?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's true. Kentucky, that's more West Virginia.
Well,
right?
you know, they share a border.
Like the friend of mine who's a weatherman says that relative humidity has a different definition in West Virginia. It's how much you sweat when you sleep with your cousin. But
see, you would have been better off starting off with
that joke. Yeah, but that's the thing that you have to look at when you're accommodating under the law, and it's actually the same analysis with a disability. If someone can't lift more than 10 pounds because of a disability, and they're applying to be a clerk at let's say, an Office Depot, how often do they really need to lift more than 10 pounds? They want to be a cashier, for example. That's rare. You can't not hire them for that limitation. But if you're hiring them,
but if I'm hiring a workout instructor or
somebody to work in a warehouse, their whole job is to lift packages and put them on a truck.
Right.
You can't hire them. That's not discriminating against them for their disability. They have to be able to do the job. So it's a similar analogy.
That makes sense. And, you know, it's funny because we're now, as people become more educated about the law, obviously they're going to find ways to push the envelope. And I think about a week ago or so, I don't know, here locally, where we had at the Arby's, at the restaurant, where a clerk, or let's call it the person behind the counter, I guess, refused. I think it might have been a drive-through or just.
No, I think it was it was a cashier.
Refused to serve a uniformed police officer because of all of the recent issues that have been happening with police in the news, and I believe this clerk was African American,
right? And
so it was part of the Black Lives Matter movement. So, I mean, the argument, I guess, it's not a religious, that's more of a political, but you can see how people are going to say, look, I don't, and that clerk refused to do it. Now, the employer, we were talking about it, although they didn't, I think in that case, the employer could have fired that person on the spot.
Right, and I think that's the uproar is that they didn't fire that. I mean, at some point, we're at-will employees, unless you have a contract. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the person that runs the cash register at an Arby's does not have a contract with Arby's.
Right.
They're an at-will employee. And if you see someone as an at-will employee do something that you don't like, as long as you're not discriminating against them on the basis of race, national origin, sex, religion, whatever, disability, you can turn to them and go, pull the old Donald Trump. You're fired. It's just that simple.
I'm not sure I agree with that link.
You had to bring up. You always bring up Trump. I had to find a way to bring him up once.
We'll find a way to reach out to bring up Trump. But you know what's interesting about that example is, and we talked about it. You can get creative and say, well, it may not be a religious view, but you know, could they argue? Well, look, it's discriminatory. In other words, I'm African American. I don't feel comfortable serving. Maybe the example was, let's say someone walks in with a KKK outfit, you know, with the hood and everything. Do they have to serve them?
I assume you're not equating KKK with police.
I am not. I am not.
I know. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on that.
Listen, I have friends in law enforcement.
Right. I know. I'm giving you, because as lawyers we go to the extreme examples. Right. Obviously, that example would be more interesting.
You have to read between the lines here. Obviously, you have an African American clerk, and then you have a white uniformed police officer, and there's friction between the two. And so most people look at it and say, it's a uniformed police officer. I mean, come on. You know, as kids were taught, those are people that, you know, safe and all that stuff. But to take it to the extreme, it's what if the person came in
and that's a great law school question. If someone came in a Klan outfit and an African-American employee refused to serve them, I would like to think that the employer would accommodate that wish.
But do they have to?
And in fact, I would like to think if someone in a Klan outfit came into an Arby's that the Arby's would kick them out and wouldn't serve them, period.
Well, they don't have to serve them because it's a private business.
Right.
But here's the question. Does the employer have to accommodate the clerk who says, I don't want to serve this person?
As a matter of law, that would be an interesting question. Usually when you think of accommodating someone, you think of accommodating based on a religious belief or a disability. National origin cases typically tie into the religion of that national origin. I've really never seen a case like that where someone that is of a particular race...
Maybe we should do like an off-site little test. Have you go dressed up in a Klan outfit to the Arby's and see what kind of... But
you're asking me to do two things I wouldn't do. One, dress up in a Klan outfit, and two, go to Arby's. But that's okay.
You know, but look, these are extreme examples, but again, so in some people's views, is a clerk standing up saying, I refuse to issue marriage licenses on the grounds of my religious views, which, you know, to some people, that's an extreme view, and others, that's a perfectly within their right.
And then you've got the cake example, right? The couple that owns the bakery. I forget what state that was in. Was it Maryland? I'm trying to remember the state that they owned the bakery and refused to bake a cake for the gay wedding.
Right.
and we're fined because that state recognizes discrimination against gay and lesbians as a valid form of discrimination?
Because you can't now. It's a private business,
Right,
But you still
but
cannot
you still
discriminate.
cannot. We're not there federally yet. The federal government and the federal discriminatory statutes don't recognize discrimination against gay and lesbians as a valid form of discrimination. Some states do. So states recognize that even a private entity cannot discriminate against someone. In other words, federally, even though you're a private business, you cannot refuse to serve African Americans or Jews or Arabs or really any.
What about someone in a Klan outfit?
I don't think that would be a protected class.
And if
I think
someone walks
absolutely.
in a Nazi with a swastika,
I think you can refuse to serve them. That's not a national origin per se. I mean, I guess they could claim they're German, but it's still not. I don't think that would be based on national
or the
origin.
Klan, it would be a religious view.
I don't think that'd be a protected religious view.
But you see how these things all have very interesting, avenues that you can go to.
Well, that's what makes the law interesting in so many ways. Where do you draw lines? And judges and juries and lawyers have to try to do that all the time.
It is the judges and the jurors
Right.
who ultimately decide what is reasonable, whether or not here's a law. Is this a reasonable application of the law under these set of facts? And so
Correct.
we've dealt with extremes. The Arby's is somewhere in the middle. Obviously, the Klan is on one side, and the Kentucky law clerk. I mean, I keep calling her a law clerk, but she's just a regular
Right.
clerk. Good old regular clerk. All right, we got our 2-minute warning about 30 seconds ago. So you get a whole whopping 1 minute of the takeaway since we need to fill up the space.
Yeah, what we've learned, I think, in some ways, or what we've talked about is we do have an amendment in our Constitution that church and state shouldn't mix.
Right.
And I think what we're seeing right now are hybrids of that, and why church and state shouldn't mix, because it does create an incredible slippery slope and difficult line drawing.
All right, and so we have for our quote of the day, or a deep thought of the day, this is from Gandhi, titled 7 Dangers to Human Virtue. 1, wealth without work. 2, pleasure without conscience. 3, knowledge without character. 4, business without ethics. 5, science without humanity. 6, very apropos, religion without sacrifice. And lastly, I think very apropos, Mr. Trump, if you're listening, 7, politics without principle. And this concludes this segment of Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
Good evening, everybody.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, 2 rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential.
The opinions expressed on the